Next thing that we want is on the home page of the application, we want the login and register right here on the right side. So for that, let me create a partial view. We'll close the application and let me close all the tabs we have open. Inside our shared folder, we will be creating all of the partial views. So right click, add a new view. This time we can select the razor view because we know it will be a partial view. So right here we have more options. What will be the name of the view? Let me call this as underscore login partial. This will be an empty because we do not want to use any template like create, edit, delete or details. We are not using any DB context. That will be enabled if we were using a built-in template. We want to create it as a partial view and let's add this. Now where will we call this partial view? That we will be calling inside our main layout, which is underscore layout, and right here, if you remember, we have the home and privacy list. So we will be adding a partial view here and the name will be underscore login partial. So that brings to another question on what is partial view. Partial views are basically a view inside a view. Now if you examine the underscore login partial, it will not have a model. And because of that, the naming convention is we add an underscore before the name to denote that this is a partial view. What we are doing is whatever we will be writing inside login partial, that will be displayed inside the div that is right here. Let me show that with an example. If inside h2 I have hello here, let me run the application. It's hard to see here, but there you go. You can see inside the nav bar, we have hello. So right here, we want login and register. Now that login and register we will want if a user is not signed in. So how can we check here if a user is signed in or not? For that, inside the identity library that we added, there is a sign-in manager. And on that sign-in manager, there is a function or a method which is called isSignedIn. And you have to pass a global user object. So if that is signed in, the condition will be true. So how do we check that? We have to inject that using dependency injection. So that lies inside Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity.SignInManager. You can see here it works on a type of T-user. Now what is that T-user? That T-user is the identity user. But that identity user is inside Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity.IdentityUser. This is the default implementation of identity user that comes when you use the ASP.NET Identity. We will be changing this very shortly. But this looks good for sign-in manager. Let me call this as sign-in manager. Then we can add an if condition and we will be using the razor syntax with the @sign. So we'll say if sign-in manager, you can see there is the method is signed in and this expects a user. This user object automatically gets the system.security claims of the current logged in user. You do not have to declare this or anything. It is present there by default. So if the user is signed in, we want to display log off button, but if it is not signed in, that's what we want to work on right now. So if that is not signed in, we want to add a UL with a class of nav and we have class of navbar_nav. Within this UL, we will have two li elements. First, we have to display a link. So for that, you can use tag helpers or we also have traditional HTML helpers. The HTML helper to generate a link is action link, and then we have to define many properties here. First is the text that we want, which will be sign up, followed by the action name. So the action name it should go to will be register, and then the controller name will be the account controller. Make sure you do not have any spelling mistakes here. After that, you can define custom route values. Let me do that as null. And we have HTML attributes if we want to give it any ID or CSS. So HTML attributes will be new, and let me give this an ID of register link. We won't be using this ID right now, but I wanted to show you that with the HTML helpers, if you have to give any ID or any class, you can do that with HTML attributes. This li element looks good. Let me paste it again. Next one will be for sign in. And sign in will take you to the login action method inside the account controller. And let me call this ID as login link. Let's run the application and see what happens. Now when you run the application, you will see a weird error message. Let me show that to you. Now you see that there is an error message which says that no service for type sign-in manager has been registered. Why is it displaying this error message? The reason is if we go back, we are injecting the sign-in manager. But when you inject something, you have to register that inside the Startup CS configure services. We have not registered identity inside the configure services. If you are using the ASP.NET identity, you have to register that right here. So how do we add the identity service? So on the service object, we will add identity, and here it expects two objects. First is the user and next is the role. Right now we are using the default implementation which uses identity user and identity role. So right here we can say we are using the identity user. We will have to press Ctrl dot to include the using statement, comma, the role will be identity role. Then on this add identity, we have to configure our database connection. Because when a user will be registered, we will be saving that to the database using this DB context and using Entity Framework. So we have to register a store for our identity. So on there we have add Entity Framework stores, and what will be the DB context? The DB context that we have for our application is application DB context. Once you complete this step, identity will be injected inside the container. And then if you run the application again, you will not face the error message that you saw before. So right here, we have sign in and sign up. If you click on any one of them, you will see the pages are being rendered. So with that, let's continue in the next video.